Hey everyone, welcome back to MangaMinute. I'm thrilled to share my latest recap video with you. If you missed the previous one, no worries, just take a quick peek in the description below for the link. Now, let's dive right in and enjoy.
The arrival of the uninvited guests threw the lady into a fury. The lady, later known as Sunyakran, the leader of the bandit gang, she turned sharply, her eyes blazing with anger as she demanded to know the intruder's origins. Tension crackled in the air as Poong Cheon, incensed by the disrespect in her tone, drew his sword in one fluid motion. Without hesitation, he launched himself toward her, his movements swift and precise, like a predator closing in on its prey. Sunyakran reacted with the ferocity of a cornered animal, her rage manifesting in the violent throw of her two chakrams. They sliced through the air with a deadly hiss, the speed of their flight matching the fury behind her attack. Poong Cheon, facing the oncoming weapons, knew evasion was futile. With a swift slash of his sword, he cleaved one chakram in half. In the same heartbeat, he propelled himself upward, twisting his body in midair to evade the second chakram. His maneuver was not just one of defense but also counterattack. Spinning in the air, he redirected the remaining chakram toward its origin. However, Sunyakran, proving her cunning and agility, threw herself flat to the ground in a desperate bid to avoid the redirected weapon. The chakram, narrowly missing her, clanged harmlessly against the wall behind her, leaving a mark where it struck. Sunyakran, despite wielding her hidden weapon with lethal intent, found herself unable to gain the upper hand against Poong Cheon. Her frustration boiled over, her anger palpable in the air. But in a swift, nearly imperceptible motion, Poong Cheon suddenly appeared behind her, his presence commanding and his intent clear. Yet, even cornered, Sunyakran did not falter. A twisted smile formed on her lips as she turned her gaze toward Doyagang, who now stood surrounded by her loyal subordinates. The threat was immediate. One of her men, eyes filled with menace, pressed his sword to Doyagang's neck, the blade glinting dangerously close to his skin. The unspoken ultimatum hung heavy in the air. Sunyakran's forces had positioned themselves strategically, trapping the young man in a deadly vice. The subordinates stood ready, their laughter cruel and mocking, knowing that the life of their leader's enemy hung by a thread. Poong Cheon, eyes widening in horror, turned his focus toward Doyagang. The sight of his master in peril sent a shock of fear through him, his resolve momentarily shaken. The room seemed to narrow, every breath and movement suddenly amplified. Sunyakran, seeing the tide shift in her favor, grinned with a sinister glee. The power dynamic had reversed in an instant. Her voice rang out with cruel triumph as she taunted Poong Cheon, relishing his helplessness in the face of her leverage. Her subordinates, emboldened by their leader's dominance, erupted in harsh, jeering laughter, filling the room with a cacophony of malice. With a composed expression, Doyagang revealed a hidden weapon from beneath his sleeve. His eyes flashed with a deadly resolve as he sprang into action. Moving with swift, precise movements, he struck out at the bandits encircling him. In a matter of moments, several of his foes were neutralized, their bodies collapsing to the ground before they even realized what had happened. His display of skill sent the remaining bandits stumbling backward, hastily retreating to put some distance between themselves and this unexpectedly formidable opponent. Poong Cheon watched the scene unfold with a surge of pride. His master had proven his prowess yet again. His eyes shone with admiration, witnessing Doyagang's hidden technique in action. Poong Cheon's pride spilled over as he exalted Doyagang's display, marveling at the sheer brilliance of the attack that had dispersed their enemies. However, Doyagang's response was far from celebratory. His sharp gaze turned on Poong Cheon, chastising him for his earlier decisions. It was a rebuke that cut deep, but Poong Cheon, unwavering in his loyalty, fell to his knees. Without hesitation, Poong Cheon began to bang his head against the floor in penance, his actions both earnest and dramatic. His voice filled the room as he vowed to continue the self-punishment, determined to make amends for his perceived disobedience. The scene was almost absurd in its intensity, a loyal retainer seeking forgiveness in the most exaggerated manner possible. Sunyakran, observing this chaotic turn of events, felt a mixture of exasperation and reluctant admiration. She had faced many opponents in her time, But these two were something else entirely. Their unpredictability, their intense loyalty, and the sheer audacity of their actions were unlike anything she had ever encountered. With a begrudging acceptance, she recognized that resistance was futile against such an unusual pair. The fight had been drained out of her, not by overwhelming force, but by the sheer absurdity and determination of her adversaries. Acknowledging her defeat, Sanyakran surrendered. She ordered her men to stand down and granted Doyagang and Poong Cheon safe passage within her stronghold. Doyagang sank into the warmth of the hot tub, his eyes half closed as he reflected on the chaotic events that had unfolded. The martial arts world was as unpredictable as ever, full of unexpected encounters and fierce personalities. The encounter with Sanyakran, the bandit leader, lingered in his mind. Her taunts and the chaos of their clash had worn him out. He found himself wishing he would never have to cross paths with her again. He longed for rest, hoping that the turmoil of the night would be left behind him. Emerging from the bath, he made his way to the room Sanyakran had offered. Despite his low expectations, given the modest size of the hideout, he was pleasantly surprised by the comfort it offered. The room was unexpectedly well appointed, with a beautiful landscape painting adorning the wall, a soft glow from aromatic candles filling the air with a calming scent, and the most inviting sight of all, a plush, fluffy bed. Exhaustion washed over him at the thought of finally resting in such comfort. Without hesitation, he threw himself onto the bed, basking in the luxurious softness. For a brief moment, he thought he had found true happiness, a rare moment of peace after a tumultuous night. However, as he stretched out, his hand brushed against something unexpected. His eyes snapped open, his calm shattered by the strange sensation beneath the covers. Jolting upright, he quickly discovered the source, a figure wrapped in a blanket and bound tightly with ropes. It was Sanyakran, her pressure points pressed to keep her immobile. Shock and disbelief coursed through Doyagang as he processed the sight before him. He erupted in a shout, calling for Poong Cheon, who appeared almost instantly. Doyagang's voice was incredulous as he demanded an explanation, gesturing toward the bed where Sanyakran lay restrained. Poong Cheon, ever dutiful, seemed momentarily taken aback by his master's reaction. He had taken Doyagang's earlier sentiments to heart, interpreting them in a way that led to this bizarre situation. Bowing deeply, he offered to dispose of the leader if that was what Doyagang desired. Doyagang, his earlier exhaustion giving way to exasperation, scolded Poong Cheon. He had found Sanyakran's company tolerable at first, perhaps even enjoyable, until her insults had soured their interactions. But this was far beyond what he had intended. All he wanted now was to rest, not to deal with another complication. With a sigh of frustration, he ordered Poong Cheon to release her blood points, eager to avoid any further misunderstandings or confrontations. His hopes for a peaceful night had been dashed, replaced once more by the chaos that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Once released from her bindings, Sanyakran exhaled a sigh of relief, her irritation palpable. Doyagang, trying to defuse the situation, introduced himself, but her response was as sharp-tongued as ever. She immediately took to swearing, her words cutting through the air with a casual disdain that made Doyagang inwardly sigh. It seemed that Sanyakran had an inexhaustible supply of insults, a trait that was already wearing on his nerves. Without further ado, he turned his attention to arranging his bedding on the floor, his exhaustion taking precedence over any further exchanges. He declared his intention to sleep, hoping to end the chaotic night on a peaceful note. Sanyakran, however, appeared unfazed by his abruptness. To her, conversation seemed more of a nuisance than a necessity. She agreed with a nonchalant remark, her tone indifferent. But when Doyagang insisted they sleep separately, his irritation evident, her expression shifted. She was taken aback by his insistence, her mind quickly crafting another provocation. With a sly smirk, she questioned his hesitation, implying weakness with a taunt designed to provoke him. Doyagang, caught off guard by the unexpected insult, momentarily stuttered. Her accusation struck a nerve, causing his face to flush with a mix of surprise and anger. Sanyakran watched him intently, her eyes gleaming with malice. Her provocation had hit its mark, and she silently planned to use this moment of distraction to her advantage. She intended to strike when his guard was down, her mind calculating the best way to end his life in a swift, brutal manner. Doyagang's outrage, however, quickly overcame his initial shock. He erupted in fury at her brazen insult, his patience finally snapping. Without a second thought, he forcibly ejected her from the room, his frustration boiling over. Sanyakran, still smirking, stumbled out, her plan thwarted for the moment but not forgotten. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Poong Cheon overheard the commotion. He couldn't help but chuckle quietly to himself, finding the situation a testament to his master's unyielding spirit. Doyagang sat by the riverbank, the moon casting a silver sheen across the water. His thoughts weighed heavily on him, the events of the night replaying in his mind. Sleep had eluded him, thanks in no small part to the antics of Sanyakran. He felt as though he was surrounded by madness. The martial arts world seemed filled with unpredictable and dangerous individuals. Among them, Poong Cheon stood out as the most dangerous. With effortless precision, Poong Cheon had deflected every attack thrown his way, leaving Doyagang with a chilling realization. His current skills were woefully inadequate for surviving in this ruthless world. The more he dwelled on it, the more his unease grew. Poong Cheon could kill him at any moment if he so wished, and then there was the demon cult, a shadowy force constantly looming over him. Doyagang's father had once brought peace to the martial arts world, a legacy that felt distant and out of reach. Despite his father's accomplishments, he had only imparted to Doyagang a single technique, the hidden spirit flash. Why had his father not prepared him better for this world of danger? Doyagang's fist clenched, frustration boiling within him. What had his father been thinking, leaving him so ill-equipped for the perils that surrounded him? Before he could finish his brooding, a flicker in the water's reflection caught his eye. Startled, he instinctively turned to look behind him, but there was nothing, only the silent landscape shrouded in night. His heart pounded as he scanned the area, convinced he had seen something or someone. The unsettling feeling of being watched gripped him, and a surge of adrenaline coursed through his veins. The aura of a formidable presence was approaching, fast and powerful. His hand flew to his weapon, readying himself for an attack. Whoever or whatever it was closing in on him at an incredible speed. But then, out of the darkness, Poong Cheon emerged. His voice broke through the tension like a gust of wind, urging Doyagang to return inside from the cold night. The tension that had coiled within Doyagang's body dissipated in an instant, replaced by a mix of relief and exasperation. It was just Poong Cheon, after all. Doyagang's grip on his weapon loosened, his breath escaping in a heavy sigh. His body, still trembling slightly from the moment of fear, betrayed how on edge he had been. He couldn't help but wonder if he had been more affected by the night's events than he realized. His nerves, stretched thin by the encounters with both friend and foe, left him questioning his own readiness for the battles that lay ahead. Doyagang gestured for Poong Cheon to sit beside him, his voice carrying an unusual weight. It wasn't a request but a directive that hinted at the gravity of what was to come. Poong Cheon, ever humble and respectful of his master, initially refused, preferring to stand at a respectful distance. However, Doyagang insisted, his eyes revealing a mix of frustration and earnestness. He had questions that needed answers, questions that had haunted him for years. Poong Cheon, sensing the urgency in his master's voice, finally relented. Instead of sitting beside Doyagang, he chose to kneel in front of him, maintaining his posture of deference. Doyagang stared into the distance, his mind racing back to his father and the perplexing decisions that had shaped his life. His father had strictly forbidden him from learning martial arts, allowing him to master only one technique, the hidden spirit flash. Yet, despite this limitation, his father had appointed him as the leader of the demon cult, a position that demanded not just authority but the martial prowess to back it up. The contradiction gnawed at Doyagang's mind. How was he to reconcile his father's actions with the responsibilities that now rested on his shoulders? What had his father been thinking when he withheld the knowledge that could have made Doyagang a formidable leader? Kneeling before him, Poong Cheon listened quietly, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and steady. He assured Doyagang that the hidden spirit flash was far from a weak martial art. In fact, it was a technique of great power, one that required profound internal energy to wield effectively. Doyagang's father had not deprived him, but had instead given him a unique weapon. Poong Cheon's words carried a quiet conviction, emphasizing that Doyagang possessed more strength than he realized. However, the weight of this revelation didn't lift the burden from Doyagang's shoulders. It only deepened the mystery surrounding his father's intentions and the path he was meant to walk. Doyagang's frustration simmered as he pressed on, his voice edged with a mixture of confusion and indignation. Internal energy alone, he argued, was insufficient to command the martial arts world, let alone the formidable demon cult. His father's decision to restrict his learning to the hidden spirit flash remained an enigma, one that Doyagang was desperate to unravel. He demanded answers from Poong Cheon, his gaze intense, seeking clarity amidst the shadows of his father's motives. Poong Cheon, still kneeling before him, met his master's eyes with an unwavering calmness. He explained that Doyagang was meant to become the ultimate martial artist, a goal that transcended mere mastery of multiple techniques. Yet, this answer did little to pacify Doyagang. He dismissed it as nonsense, gesturing dismissively. How could he, in his current state, hope to dominate the martial arts world? He was far from possessing the strength or the knowledge needed to achieve such an ambition. The idea seemed absurd, almost mocking his current reality. Humbly, Poong Cheon responded with careful words, choosing them with the precision of a blade. What Doyagang sought, he explained, could not be found within the confines of the demon cult. There was a path laid out for him, but the time was not yet ripe for him to know all the answers. The mysteries of his father's decisions and the true purpose behind his training were still shrouded in the future. Poong Cheon could say no more, bound by an understanding that Doyagang was not yet prepared to grasp the full scope of what lay ahead. Then, with a shift in tone, Poong Cheon proposed they retire for the night. He advised Doyagang to rest, for they would depart at dawn for the main base of the Green Forest. His words were resolute, carrying an authority that implied this was not merely a suggestion but a necessary step in Doyagang's journey. Doyagang was taken aback, his confusion deepening. Why the Green Forest? What purpose did it serve in this labyrinth of his father's design? Before he could voice his protest fully, Poong Cheon spoke with a stern finality. They would go there to take over the world. Irritation flared in Doyagang's eyes as Poong Cheon's words echoed in his mind. The notion of taking over the world was the final straw in a long line of expectations that had been forced upon him. In a burst of frustration, he swung his fist at Poong Cheon, aiming to vent his anger on the one who seemed to push him relentlessly toward a fate he had never chosen. Yet the impact was not what he expected. Poong Cheon's body, as unyielding as stone, absorbed the blow effortlessly. It was Doyagang who recoiled, clutching his hand in pain, a growl of agony escaping his lips. His frustration only deepened, the sting of his failed outburst a bitter reminder of the power imbalance between them. Doyagang's shoulders slumped as he voiced his grievances. He had never aspired to lead the demon cult, much less to conquer the world. Every step seemed to be dictated by the whims of others, his father, Poong Cheon, and the looming expectations of an entire martial world. Where was his say in all this? Where was his choice? His voice cracked under the weight of his lament, a plea for autonomy drowned in the chaos of duties imposed upon him. Poong Cheon, however, remained resolute. His expression, steadfast and unyielding, mirrored the conviction that guided him. In his eyes, the path was clear, and it was his duty to guide Doyagang down that road, regardless of the young master's hesitation. With firm resolve, he declared his intention to lead Doyagang to supremacy. There was no room for doubt, no allowance for second thoughts. In Poong Cheon's mind, the world was meant to bow to his lord, and he would ensure it happened. Doyagang could only mutter helplessly under his breath, feeling cornered by his own guardian. It was as if the walls were closing in, and every attempt to assert his will was met with Poong Cheon's unshakable determination. His voice barely a whisper, he called out for help, an almost childish plea against the overwhelming force that sought to steer his destiny.